Okay, in that case, it is now 1:32. This is Neil Gaynor, and I'm called to order the regular meeting of the Board of Directors of Montgomery County Municipal District, Utility District number 6. And Brian, could you take us through the governor's order and the processes for this meeting, please?
This is Brian, happy to, Neil, for one more time before we go back in person next month. So this is Brian Yates with SPH, and welcome, as Neil said, to the Montgomery County MUD number 6 Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, July the 21st, 2021. As in prior meetings, I'll briefly go through our remote meeting procedures and then we'll perform a roll call. So to begin with, I need to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded as required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Second, please remember to state your name before you speak, including the making of any motions. When you're not speaking, please be sure to mute your line. Third, we will continue the practice of having a roll call to vote on each motion. After a motion has been made and seconded, please wait until you hear your name called and then respond with a verbal aye, a nay, or an abstention. Finally, we need to identify each person who's joining the meeting remotely today so that we can accurately reflect the attendance in the minutes of the meeting. I'll perform a roll call for the board members, followed by staff and consultants. When you hear your name or your company called, please respond by indicating that you're present in the meeting. Likewise, if you need to leave the meeting before it adjourns, please announce that you're doing so before you disconnect. Once I've completed a roll call for directors, staff, and consultants, I'll ask for any members of the public to identify themselves for the record. So starting with the roll call for our board of directors, Neil Gaynor.
Present.
Brooke Hamilton.
Present.
Deborah Sargent.
Present.
Ronnie Cucci.
Present.
Bruce Cunningham.
Present.
Okay, we do have a full quorum of our board present, so we will move on to Woodlands Water staff. Jim Stinson.
Present.
Mike Mooney.
Present.
Maureen Bourgeois.
Present.
Shelley Lawson Kennedy.
Present.
Jeannie Scott.
Present.
Anyone else from Woodlands Water in the meeting? Okay, we'll move on to Sandra Center River Authority staff. Ron Kelly.
Present.
Ed Shackelford.
Present.
Chris Meeks.
Present.
Anyone else from the River Authority in the meeting?
No, sir.
All right, then we will move to MUD 6 consultants. Do we have any MUD 6 consultants in the meeting today? And finally, members of the public. Do we have any members of the public present in the meeting? We need to identify you for the record as well.
This is Lauren Orton.
Aaron Hofstetter.
This is Brian. Do we have any other members of the public present in the meeting? If not, Maureen, does that appear to be everyone who is logged into the meeting today?
It appears so.
All right, Neil, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. That'll complete the roll call. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. This is Neil Gaynor speaking. Moving on with the standard items in the agenda. Receive comments from the public. Are there any comments? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to agenda item 3. Receive president and directors' comments. Could I have any comments from directors first, please?
I'd like to make some comments.
And this is Deborah Sargent. I'd like to make some comments as well.
Okay, Bruce, I believe you were first, and go ahead, please.
Okay. I would like to make a comment on an item that appears in the trustees' report. Trustee May shared his concern about statements made by Trustee Laura Norton in the Villager article in June. He stated that she was in violation of the Code of Ethics, Section 112, which states that acting or speaking on behalf of any district for the WJPA without express authorization to do so by the governing body of the same entity. She was not speaking on behalf of the JPA when she made the statement. I know I was quoted in the same article. I was asked the same question. I was given the same parameters as she was, and I did not state anything other than my name. The article, however, did state I am a MUD director. I did not state that or imply that I was speaking on as a MUD director, nor did Ms. Norton. Both of us had been approached with the same request. Please comment on this presentation made by Don Norell to the Woodlands Township Board of Trustees. And his presentation was entirely related to MUDs. It is 50 or 60 slides long. We were approached by the reporter because he knew that both of us, one, were MUD directors because of activities that we've done before, and residents who are interested in what is happening in the community, and people who would have watched the presentation made by Mr. Norell, particularly when it was advertised in advance. In his presentation, Mr. Norell noted that administrative costs for the MUDs are 1.6 million, and noted that much of this could be saved if we became a city. $131,000 in director's fees, $213,000 in appraisal district fees, $299,000 in property tax administration, and the list goes on until you add up to the 1.6 million. If you haven't looked at it, I suggest you and all directors look at the video of his presentation. You can find it on the Woodlands Township website. Mr. Norell, who by the way was the former president of the Woodlands Township, general manager, then presented three alternatives that a city could take if we did vote on incorporation. One, we could maintain the status quo. Two, we could abolish the MUDs and have the cities take over. And he 8 potential benefits that would occur if that happened. Or three, we could establish an interlocal agreement between the MUDs and the city that would allow the MUDs to continue operating until the debt had been paid off. Clearly, this last proposal is the one that is most logical to follow. Now, I think if incorporation is put on the ballot in November, and I think there's a good chance that it will be, I also think that there is a good chance that it will be approved. And if that is the case, in thinking about what has happened so far, there are some conclusions I draw from this whole exercise. One, the trustees should establish a committee that will plan to work with the new city based upon what Mr. Norell stated in his presentation. And I think Mr. Norell's presentation was an invitation to do so. Secondly, the trustees should have a person who is known to the press who can respond to questions rather than having reporters go and seek the people he knows. Third, I would like to speak up for Ms. Norton. She is one of the most active directors and trustees working to make the public aware of water issues. She is the only MUD director that has been on Woodlands Water since day one. She was the founder of an effort that was started by John Yours, Neil Gaynor, Bob Lux, George Newman, and myself, called Stop Our Sinking, which was to raise the level of awareness throughout Montgomery County about what was happening with Lone Star and the problems with subsidence. She was behind the creation of a water education website with HARC that is still in the process of being developed. She has made presentations to the Woodlands Township on subsidence. In my opinion, Ms. Norton should be applauded rather than beaten. The final thought is I have looked at the ethics code, and that is not what needs to be changed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Deborah, could you please make your comments? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I would like to, this is actually directed at our attorney, but it's in relationship to the email that all of our board members on MUD 6 received from two of our board members, independently, emails that we received that was sent to all of the board members from two different board members. And my concern is, and I want clarification, is this any kind of a violation, or should we take any kind of action, or is there any repercussions from a board member sending out a global email to the rest of the board members without it going through staff first? I'm concerned because we received those emails over the past couple of weeks here, and I'm just concerned that we are skirting, or if we are not already in violation. So I would like to have our attorney comment on that.
This is Brian. So I think, one, this is about receiving comments. We don't typically, similar to comments from the public, we don't typically have discussion on items from related to comment. I don't have, I'll tell you, Deborah, I don't have those emails in front of me. I don't know that I've even seen them, period, to be able to comment on them. I can just say generally, the rule is that you are not to deliberate district business outside of a board meeting. So the best way is, yes, to always go through staff. But there have been instances, not necessarily this district, but in other cases where there's been an email go out, an informational email go out from one director to a number of directors, and maybe they do it by BCC so that there can't be a reply to all. And that is not, that in and of itself is not a problem because there's no deliberation. Where the line becomes crossed, and it's very fact specific, depending on what the individual circumstance is. But if there's deliberation in response to that email that's informational, that's where you get into issues. But I can't speak specifically on the issue that you're referring to in terms of those two emails.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, I just sent you copies of them.
Brian, this is Neil Gaynor. Do you wish to take time to review before you comment further?
This is Brian, yes, but I think, again, this is something that we wouldn't get into any details of any particular discussion under a comment item. If it's something that we want to talk about in more detail about communications for open meetings, we certainly can. I would suggest that we have that discussion in closed session at a future meeting if y'all would like.
Okay, I think that's probably worthwhile, but not at this time, because insufficient consideration on this matter has you haven't had sufficient time to consider this. So yeah, perhaps at a future meeting. Are there any other comments from directors?
Neil, this is Ron Cucci. I'd like to have a couple of short comments. I like to categorize these comments just by calling them rush to judgment by at least one director within MUD 6 with regard to the MUD 1 and MUD 6 merger. As I recall from several months ago, on consideration of a MUD 1 and MUD 6 merger, two directors were picked from each MUD. I believe it was Brooke Hamilton and Neil Gaynor from MUD 6 and Bob Lilac and Walter Lazuski from MUD 1. I have never seen a recommendation from that committee that was formed, that was agreed upon with the committee members and signed and sent to the other directors for consideration. That's all my comments are.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other comments from directors?
Neil, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. I worked on this and I did my best to involve Brooke in the process. At the last meeting of this board, I attempted to solicit advice from all board members, and it was unanimous that all board members would agree to the concept of having a consolidation voted by the residents of MUD 6, and that's in the record. So therefore, I have tried throughout to involve directors as much as possible. And I'm sorry, I view this as a straightforward matter. Just by the way, you probably need to know that the past week or so, I've had a medical setback, and I'm working on recovery. And so anyway, I'm still able to function, thankfully. You know, for me, there's been plenty of opportunity to for directors to say what their position is. And once I received that unanimous adoption of a position of sending a recommendation to the voters, I took that as exactly what should be in the report. And that was the only item that was put in as a recommendation based on input from this board. So that's all I've got to say about that.
Neil, I'd like to add one more comment then, just for clarification. On what appeared to me to be a rush to judgment, then there was no formal recommendation from the committee composed of 2 directors from each MUD to their respective MUDs. The recommendation came from you then, Neil Gaynor?
I wrote the recommendation arising from our meeting into that report. It was the only recommendation. I discussed it with Bob Lilac, and he agreed.
One does have to wonder what the purpose of the committee was then. I have no more comments.
This is Brooke Hamilton, and I'd like to make a comment. And that was that this committee of 4 people never met and never came up with a recommendation. And I think that was misleadingly portrayed in this process. That's all I have.
Is there anything else? Moving on to item 4. Consider an act on requests for adjustments to or relief from the specific charges imposed by the district. I guess that'd be you, Mike.
This is Mike, Mr. President. Nothing for this month.
This is Jeannie, and I don't have anything either.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Janine. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda, which I'll read out in full. Item 5, review and act on the minutes of the June 2021 Board of Directors meeting. Item 6, review and act on the financial reports and disbursements of June 2021. Item 7, receive and act upon the quarterly investment reports for the period April to June 2021. Item 8, receive the tax collector's report. Item 9, consider and act on approving attendance and expenses for district and/or Woodlands Water trustee business. Does any director wish to remove any item from the consent agenda and place it in the regular agenda? Okay, does any director have corrections to the minutes under item 5 of the consent agenda? Does any director have comments or questions on the remaining items in the consent agenda?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
This is Deborah Sargent, and I second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, Brian, would you take the vote, please?
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote. Neil, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brooke?
Aye.
Deborah?
Aye.
Ron?
Aye.
Bruce?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, this is Neil Gaynor. Thank you, Brian. Moving on to a regular agenda. Agenda item 10, adopt resolution casting votes for the MCAD special district candidate to be placed on a county-wide ballot for the Board of Directors of the Montgomery Central Appraisal District. And I believe we had the discussion with regard to Arthur Radehoff last time. He's our candidate. And let's see, just looking for the specific resolution. What page is that on?
16 to 21.
Okay, so on page 21. So there's the resolution. So I think this is pretty straightforward that we adopt a resolution casting all 5 votes for Arthur Radehoff to be the special district representative on the Montgomery Central Appraisal District. Are there any comments or questions before we go to the vote? All right, I need a motion then to adopt the resolution to nominate our votes in favor of Arthur. Could I have a?
This is Ron Cochi. I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Ron. May I have a second, please?
This is Deborah, and I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any further comments? or discussion? Hearing none, Brian, over to you to take the vote.
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion on item 10, we'll call the vote. Neil, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brooke,
Aye.
Deborah,
Aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Bruce,
Aye.
motion carries. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. Moving on to item 11, receive the San Jacinto River Authority Woodlands Division report. I guess that's you, Chris?
Yes, sir. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Meeks. I do not have anything to add to the report, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer those.
Any questions for Chris? Hearing none, well, thank you for that report, Chris. Moving on to agenda item 12, consider an act on the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget for the San Jacinto River Authority Woodlands Division. And there was a document in the Google Drive on that topic.
So this is Chris Meeks again. This item is basically, we have presented the budget in May and a revised budget in June based off the GRP surface water conversion number changing. So this item is, if you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer them. But if there are no questions, then this is the item where you'll direct your trustee on how to vote at the August trustees meeting.
This is Deborah Sargent, and I make a motion that our trustee approve this budget.
Second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to instruct our trustee to vote to approve this budget at the next trustee meeting. Is there any further discussion on this before we go to the vote? Okay, Brian, could you take the vote, please?
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion on item 12, we'll call the vote. Neil, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brooke,
Aye.
Deborah,
Aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Bruce,
Aye.
motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Moving on to agenda item 13, receive and act on information for retaining the Trinity River Authority water supply agreement. And I guess this will be over to you, Ed.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Neil. This is Ed Shackelford. I'm going to share my screen with you all of the PowerPoint that we presented to you back in May, verifying that you all can see it. Those that are on the camera. Perfect. Okay. So what we're talking about today is the Trinity River water supply option for Montgomery County that SGRA currently has as a water option contract. And so the reason we're talking about it is, and my clicker is slow to work today, you all are aware that population in Montgomery County is growing. And with that growth, there is a constant need for additional water demand or water needs to be able to meet the demands of the public. There are some strategies identified in Region H, but the one we're talking about today is the Trinity River Water Supply Option Contract. And keep in mind that it takes a long time to develop a water supply and also to secure it, to develop it, to identify it, and then secure it. You've heard recently lakes up in the north part of Texas have been in planning and in queue for about 30 plus years. And so that's what we're looking at is long-term water supplies. So let's keep going. In the Region H plan, this table exists and it documents or estimates the amount of water usage in Montgomery County. It shows roughly 115,000 acre feet of water being used in 2020. And if you go, and Region H does a 50-year planning period. And so if you go out to 2070, we need almost 3 times that amount of water, 286,000 acre feet of water. Legitimately, Lake Conroe can produce 100,000 acre feet per year. Depending on where Lone Star lands on their regulations for groundwater pumpage, just, you know, assume 100, even 115,000 acre feet per year. Then, and you look at the year 2050, you're going to start needing additional water supplies shortly after the year 2050 based on population projections and water demands. And so, you know, that's a 30-year period from today. We're needing to secure additional water supplies because right now, if you only have Lake Conroe and the aquifer, you will not have enough water to meet the demands of a growing county. The water would come out of the north end of Lake Livingston and over into the north end of Lake Conroe. Some of the numbers that you will see in future slides do not reflect engineering or construction costs for the pipelines to bring water over, but this schematic or diagram offers you an idea of how that water would be conveyed from one lake to the other. It would include pump stations, pipelines, maybe even an open channel. In today's dollars, we think it's somewhere around 300 million. In 2050 dollars, it could be a little more expensive than that, just depending on what inflation does and cost of labor and fuel and all those neat things. So let's get back to today's issue. Today's issue is we have an option contract for 50,000 acre feet per year. We're paying $237,500 a year for it. And as we go forward, our current option contract has a December 2021 deadline that says you either need to create a service area agreement with the Trinity River Authority for approximately $250,000 and initiate the interbasin transfer permits. That means you're moving water from one river basin to another river basin. This may even take legislative assistance, and nothing happens the first go round in that you take something to the legislature. So that's why I say it may involve a couple of legislative sessions. This number that's estimated here for the cost of it is based on what our water rights attorneys are saying is probably a reasonable price to anticipate it would cost to get this permit. There's also a deadline for an April 2028 to convert the service area agreement into a water supply contract. And that means you're reserving water for our use. And that reservation cost is estimated about 1.5 million. And after that, you're either paying to reserve the water or you're paying to take it, whether you're taking it or not. So let's talk about the impact to you all. Based on the numbers that are in the previous slides, we think the cost for the time period 2022 to 2027 is roughly 10 cents per household per month, assuming a 10,000 gallon a month user. And that's during that option period. During the reservation period from 2028 and on, That cost is estimated between 20 and 25 cents per household per month to pay the reservation fee and have that water available for when SJRA would pull the trigger to start building a project. Now, something to stress to you all. This is based on the cost being shared amongst all 80 GRP participants and all raw water customers. So the Exxons, the Chevrons, the Entergys, all the MUDs that are not taking surface water but are in the GRP contract would be assisting in paying for this water. Now, also keep in mind, this water is not needed for about 30 years. So there's going to be more places to distribute water. And so that's why we say we need to do some long range planning and make certain that Montgomery County has the water available to it for the future. So the reason we're bringing this back up is we need to go to our board, and we're looking at the September board meeting to let them know what our stakeholders, what our participants are recommending on how to proceed. Back when we presented this in May, all of the MUDs and the trustees were in favor of retaining the option for the long-term water supply. The MUDs that we have met with starting Monday night, going through all of yesterday and a little bit today, have all been in favor of proceeding and are willing to recommend to our board to support continuing the water supply option agreement. So I'm available for questions. That's the end of the slides. I hope I didn't cover it too quickly, but I'm available for questions. Mr. Cunningham,
Yes, Ed.
I see your hand up.
Okay, what other options are there other than getting this water? Anything?
There's always desalination. There's always, depending on what Lone Star does, there could be larger, deeper wells. And everything that we've seen so far from the deeper wells is the water is dirty and hot. So you would have to clean it and cool it at additional cost to be able to distribute it to the customers.
This is the reasonable option, I think you would say.
This is more cost effective than cleaning the dirty water. Yes, sir.
Okay, another question. Who gets that money, the $1 to $2 million, for example?
The money would be paid to the Trinity River Authority because they were the ones who built Lake Livingston. They developed the water rights. So this is, in some respects, this is them being paid for their foresight in developing the water supply.
So they could take that $1 to $2 million. There's nothing specific they have for it. They're just putting.
Well, I'm sure they have
plans.
Just like anybody, they have ongoing operation and maintenance costs and debt service in maintaining Lake Livingston.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Other questions? So the question becomes, are you all willing to recommend support to the River Authority or not to go forward?
I would like to make a motion to support going forward to the River Authority that would support the acquisition of the water rights from the Trinity River Authority.
This is Deborah Sargent, and I second that motion.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
The power just went off at our house, and so I lost you temporarily.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
This is Brian. Neil, there's been a motion and a second made to support the retention of the TRA rights and the water supply agreement. So we were just considering any additional discussion before we took the roll call vote.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Nothing to add.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we will call the vote on item number 13. Neil, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brooke?
Aye.
Deborah?
Aye.
Ron?
Aye.
Bruce?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Right. So moving on to agenda item 14, consider on appointing a stakeholder subcommittee member to participate in SJRA engineering consultant meetings related to wastewater plant consolidation. Who'd be taking the lead on that?
I will, Neil. In your packet is a copy of an email slash memo from Ed Shackelford to me, and pretty well describes the purpose of this agenda item and the request to allow each of our MUDs to have a stakeholder position in this deliberation and then as this goes forward. Just as a recap or full information, we've also reached out to the Chamber of Commerce. J.J. Holly has indicated he would like to serve. We've asked the township for them to have a seat or representative. We've invited MUD 386 to have a rep, and Howard Hughes Corporation to have a rep, and then each of our 10 MUDs. So that's where we are today.
Okay. So each of the MUDs will have a representative. Very good. Can I ask for a volunteer from MUD 6?
I would.
That was Bruce.
I'll make a motion that Bruce Cunningham be our representative from MUD 6. This is
Do we have a
Deborah, by the way.
motion? Do we have a second? I'm happy to second the motion. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, can we go to the vote, please?
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote. Neil, how do you vote? Neil, how do you vote?
I vote aye. Can you hear me?
Yes, I heard you that time. Thank you, Neil. Brooke, how do you vote?
Aye.
Deborah?
Aye.
Ron?
Aye.
Bruce?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. And thank Bruce volunteering. Okay, moving on to agenda item 15, receive the attorney's report. Over to you.
Thank you, Neil. This is Brian. Under the attorney's report, a couple items to note. One is that the governor has formally announced that he will be rescinding the disaster proclamation that was put in place back in March of last year when COVID first broke out, that suspended the in-person meeting requirements under the Texas Open Meetings Act, effective as of September the 1st. That shouldn't affect MUD 6 or the Woodlands District, since y'all have agreed to go back to in-person meetings in August. But all of the political subdivisions that have not gone back to meeting in person will be required to do so at that time, beginning in September. Other item of note is that on the Google Drive, you will see that there is a legislative summary from the 2021 session. As in prior legislative sessions, we have provided a general overview of the session as well as particular bills of interest to the special purpose district community, bills that did pass and significant ones that didn't. Overall, I'd say this was a fairly good session for the special purpose district community in that it was a pretty quiet session. Not really anything of note that was negative for special purpose districts. A lot of bad bills were introduced, as there are every session, but we were very successful in being able to play defense on those bills and either have those bills defeated or modified into a form that was not objectionable. So happy to answer questions if you may have them on the session, but overall it was a fairly quiet session, which is nice to have every once in a while. That's all I have of a general nature under the attorney's report. Happy to answer questions if you have them, and then I do need to go ahead and also cover 16 and 17 on the agenda.
Brian, Bruce, has there been any discussion about continuing virtual meetings as well in conjunction with in-person meetings? It would seem to make a great deal of participation available. I mean, we've got people like Ron and Brooke who typically go away during July and August, and this would allow them to participate from afar. Otherwise, we may not have a quorum sometimes.
Absolutely, and that is something. There were actually a handful of bills that were introduced in the session that would have allowed, in one form or another, remote participation post-COVID. Unfortunately, those bills did not pass. If I had to put money on it, I would bet that some form of that comes back up in the 23 session, especially after we've seen that they can, remote meetings with today's technology can work well, do not negatively impact transparency. And I think an argument can be made that it actually improves transparency, which historically has been the main reason for legislators to not support the remote meeting option. So we'll see what happens as we get into the 23 session, but there were some bills that were introduced, and I would not be surprised if we see some form of those bills come back around in 23.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to item 16? All right, if not, item 16 is to consider the adoption of a resolution concerning developed district status for the 21 tax year. I'll go ahead and go back through a refresher on this item. Last year was the first year we had this item on agendas. It relates to Senate Bill 2 that was passed in the 2019 legislative session. That was the property tax reform bill. In the 2019 session, there was a significant push to have limitations on property taxes and the perceived increased burden that those taxes have on landowners throughout the state. Senate Bill 2 has a lot of stuff in there. We've touched on it after the last session, but one of the things that impacted the special purpose district community was the way in which it modified the rollback tax rate calculation and election structure. So historically, special purpose districts such as Bud 6 had an 8% rollback rate, meaning that you could generate up to 8% more operation and maintenance tax revenue on the average homestead without being subject to a potential rollback election. If you exceeded that 8% rollback rate, then a certain number of voters in the district could petition to force a rollback election, but it wasn't automatic. What Senate Bill 2 did is it modified that rollback structure and created technically 3 tiers, but the third tier is only for districts that have, I think, a 2.5% or lower maintenance tax rate, which even in the Woodlands, I don't think we've got that. So effectively, it created 2 different tiers, one for developed districts and one for developing districts. Whether or not you were a developed or a developing district depended on a metric that was whether or not the district had constructed and financed all the facilities and sites necessary to serve 95% of the projected ultimate build out for that district. We work with the engineers and developed a form for them to fill out for each of our district clients, since they are most familiar with district facilities and build out projections, to certify as to whether or not that metric has been met for each district client. And we've done so with LJA for MUD 6 and received those this morning. If you are determined to be a developed district, which LJA has determined for MUD 6 to be a developed district, which isn't surprising since it's virtually a built-out district, your maintenance tax rollback rate is reduced from 8% down to 3.5%, which is a significant reduction. And as significant, if not more significant, is that Senate Bill 2 provides that if you exceed that 3.5% rate, you are now subject to an automatic rollback election. There's no petitioning requirement by voters to force an election. It's automatic. In today's real estate market, with prices appreciating so rapidly, it's not unlikely that we will have districts that have, throughout the Houston metro area, that have tax rolls that increase more than 3.5%, or the average resident homestead increases in value by more than 3.5%, which means that those districts that are determined to be developed districts that have average home prices, or an average home in the districts that's value increased by more than 3.5%, the taxable value, so this is through the appraisal district, that you would have to actually reduce your M&O tax rate to not be subject to an automatic rollback election. We're going to be looking at that very closely in the next month as we go through the budgeting process and tax rate recommendation process for the Woodlands MUDs. Perhaps there'll be a bit of a lag in appraised value determination from where things are in the actual market. That's possible. But it's also possible that we could already be crossing that threshold this year, and a district would have to potentially lower its M&O tax rate without being subject to an automatic election. So more to come on that. For today, we just need to take action on the resolution declaring the district a developed district pursuant to the determination by the district's engineer. And then we will move from there into the budgeting and tax rate discussion in August. So happy to answer questions if you have them. I know a little bit of a long explanation, but for this item, but since it's just the second year that we've gone through the implementation of Senate Bill 2, I wanted to make sure to refresh everyone's memory. Don't plan on going through this level of detail each year, but this will be an annual item unless Senate Bill 2 is modified in a future legislative session.
Brian, this is Neil. So in this whole business,
this is Brian. Neil, I think you're breaking up.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, in this business of the central appraisal districts and tax rolls, are there any constraints whatsoever on the limiting the increases that central appraisal districts can put on property valuations?
So that's not part of this discussion about rollback rates. There are limitations on the increases that the appraisal district can put in place for a home on a taxable value basis year to year, but that percentage number is over 3.5%. Jeannie, is it 10%? I can't remember what the number is offhand, but it's certainly more than the 3.5% number.
10%.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. Any other questions on the resolution? If not, we do need a motion to approve.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve adoption of the resolution concerning the developed district status for the 2021 tax year?
I make a motion to approve the resolution for the adoption of the tax year, whatever it was.
Thank you, Bruce. Is there a second, please?
This is Deborah, and I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Is there further discussion? I then let us take this to a vote. Brian, would you take a roll call, please?
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion on the item, we'll call the vote. Neil, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brooke?
Aye.
Deborah?
Aye.
Ron?
Aye.
Bruce?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, item number 17, discussion regarding proposed consolidation and take the following action in connection with the proposed consolidation. I know there's been a good amount of discussion early on in the director comments about consolidation. Neil, I don't know if you want to have any additional discussion before we would consider any action on A through D on the agenda. I will share with the board that these same items were on the MUD 1 agenda yesterday, and they were approved by that board.
I have no need for further discussion.
Okay, this is Brian. If there's not further discussion, then we would move down and consider the items on the agenda. I think item A would be considered separately for a motion and a vote. And if it's successful, then we could take B through D together, since those are really just mechanical election items to call the election and approve the election agreements with Montgomery County. Since it's a November election, if the board decides to move forward with the consolidation election on item A, then since it's a November election, it would have to be joint with the county. It could not be held separately. You can only hold independent elections in May. So we have to enter into the election services agreement and joint election agreement that are prepared by Montgomery County, and Montgomery County requires that all of their participating entities approve those.
Okay, thank you, Brian. May I have a motion to approve the consolidation agreement between the district, MUD 6, and the Woodlands Municipal Utility District number 1?
This is Deborah, and I'll make that motion.
Deborah, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second to the motion?
This is Bruce. I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, let us take the motion to a vote. Brian?
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote. Neil, you vote?
Aye.
Brooke?
I vote no.
Deborah?
Aye.
Ron?
Vote nay.
Bruce?
Aye.
Motion passes 3 in favor, 2 against. Thank you.
So Brian, are we going to move on to the remaining items in this particular item 17?
This is Brian. That's correct, Neil. We do need to consider a motion to approve B through D under item 17 on the agenda.
This is Deborah, and I make that a motion to approve items B through D.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. May I have a second?
I'll second. Bruce?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, let us go to the vote. Brian?
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote. Neil, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brooke?
No.
Deborah?
Aye.
Ron?
Nay.
Bruce?
Aye.
Motion carries 3 in favor, 2 against. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Brian. So moving on now to agenda item 18, receive the general manager's report. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to review most of the items that are already in the trustee summary, but I want to highlight them. We had a discussion at the request of MUD 46 director regarding implementing a program where our residents could donate money from their water bill to a fund that would help either low income or customers having difficulty paying their water bill. This was prompted by similar programs in the city of Houston. I know the city of Huntsville and probably others. During the discussion, Brian Yates, our attorney, said that cities certainly have the ability to do that, but the Texas Water Code regarding water districts, it's not specifically addressed, and he cautioned that it may be a difficult road to get down, so we put a pause on that for now. I also had a request from a MUD 46 resident to take a look at the Ian McCard 1970s era reports that George Mitchell had done pre-development of the woodlands. I found those to be very interesting and somewhat timely, in particular about discussions of groundwater, water resources, and drainage. So if you have a chance to look through those, we've sent out an email, and I think Shelley has them posted for your reading pleasure. I did report also that TACUS, we've had ongoing discussions with TACUS and their 5 prime contractors regarding damage reimbursements. One of the prime contractors kind of got at odds with TACUS and quit communicating with us or didn't communicate with us. So TACUS, in a show of good faith, paid that full damage invoice of about $35,000. So we now have 4 invoices to 4 other primes that we need to get resolved. And I think TACUS is applying some pressure on those to get those resolved, and we'll know more over the next few weeks on that. I also reported that HART has completed their recommendation for installing subsidence measuring devices throughout Montgomery County to get a clear picture of subsidence throughout the county. So that document is available on their website and ours, and we'll be using that in further discussions regarding subsidence monitoring and measurements. I also presented some options on the concerns and pardon me, the issue of AMI pole installations in a couple of neighborhoods that residents had objected to, in particular Slash Pine area and the water well site of the Sage Center River Authority up near Woodlands Parkway and Kirkendall Road. After some discussion on that, and Brian Yates advising that he thought legally the folks, or that at least contractually, the MUDs that might want to relocate those poles should probably bear the cost of that relocation. That prompted some discussion among the trustees, and they asked me to look at a potential cost sharing or cost spreading that cost or sharing that cost between all of the MUDs and bring that back at the next trustee meeting. We also reported that Sage Center River Authority staff and myself have met with the district director for Congressman Brady, expressing our desire to be put in a good position to be a recipient of some of the funds that might come from the Biden infrastructure plan. The meeting went well. He passed along our desire to the Washington, D.C. office. We've also got a meeting being set with Congressman Brady in attendance for August, early August. And we've also developed a short list of consultants and lobbyists that might help us with that effort. And that concludes my report, and I am available for questions.
I've got a question.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Any questions for Jim?
I've got a question. Jim, in your report, you did not mention MUD 6 in the AMI installation. When are we going to start getting ours?
Mike or Maureen, can you help me with that?
Yeah, stand by. Let me check the schedule. Let me check the schedule. I'll get back to you here just short.
We've had a website that we've been trying to keep updated with that information on there for residents, but I haven't looked at it in a while.
Neither have I, Jim.
Well, you know who to ask to get the data, so let's see if we can get it.
We've got, I show the latest schedule to start MUD 6 in December.
December.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what happened?
Oh.
That's the schedule I received on Monday.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. How about 36 is done?
Nope, they're after you. In
They're
January.
end of the year is what I've got. Is that what you got? End of the year?
No, I've got it starting January of 2022. This is the schedule that I just
No,
received
for
on
MUD 6.
Monday.
For MUD 6. Yeah.
MUD 6 December, yes.
Okay. Yep,
He
that's
asked
right.
about 36, and that starts in January.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we getting any comments on the use of the meters in terms of water conservation or increased water bills?
Not increased water bills that I'm aware of, but I can tell you, boy, it has sure proven to be a valuable tool with residents disputing their high water use, disputing irrigation, disputing their bill. It is really, and I think from our perspective, it's already paid for itself.
In aggravation. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions for Jim? Okay, moving on to agenda item 19, receive the Woodlands Water Trustees Report, which is in the packet. But I would draw your attention to something I don't think Jim mentioned was that there is a reprise, if you will, from Ron Kelling on Follow the Water, the sequel, on August 23rd. And we, if we want to attend, we'll let our board secretary know. So, so let's see. I don't think there's anything else that was, the interlocal agreement was signed for the Spring Creek watershed project. That's about it. So Jim covered practically everything else. Are there any questions about the trustees report? Okay, moving on to agenda item 20. Discuss any matters for placement on future agenda. Hearing none. Okay, moving on to agenda item 21. It is now 2:43, and I propose without objection that we adjourn the regular meeting of Montgomery County Utility District, Municipal Utility District number 6, 2:43 p.m. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you. This is Deborah. Goodbye.
Thank you. Hope you get a good report.
Bye, Maureen.